They are here. Osamu blinked a few times and frowned, giving Atsumu a scowl because, no, never in a million years, he just had to be wrong. They would have been recognized by now if they were here, after all. I swear I saw Omi. Osamu flicked his fingers against Atsumu's forehead and shook his head. Ouch. Illusion, Atsumu. You're seeing ghosts. No Samu, honest enough. Even if. Would that change anything? And Atsumu's heart sank. No, of course not. Osamu was right. What would it matter if Suna and Sakusa saw their performance? The twins had had enough of them, because obviously the brothers, too, were only good enough for Sakusa and Suna when they themselves were successful again. Osamu put his hand on his brother's shoulder and looked at him sympathetically. He had a cigarette clamped between his lips and spoke to his brother in a gentle tone. We deserve better. Osamu smiled faintly. Atsumu tried to smile back weakly but his look was still sad, disappointed. Head up Atsumu. Yeah, you're right. He took a deep breath, closed his eyes for a moment, and offered his twin a more honest smile this time. There you go. You're in for a smoke? Atsumu rolled his eyes and clicked his tongue. I told you to stop. Jeez. Your voice is going to ruin our band. But all Osamu did was to flash his brother a mischievous grin and disappear through the back entrance leading outside. Atsumu sighed, running a hand through his hair and putting his guitar aside. He was in a small separate room in the backstage area where the twins had stored their stuff while they played the concert. Atsumu grabbed a bottle of water and plopped down on the couch. He frowned, unable to stop thinking about this extremely familiar figure. I could have sworn. He whispered, deep in his thoughts. But Osamu was right. Would it change anything? Sakusa and Suna had hurt them, had made them feel as if they were nothing to them. If they preferred to believe what Kagami was putting up to them, then that's the way it should be. Then this was never going to work out between them anyway. Fate. Wasn't it? Atsumu. Atsumu immediately turned around, his gaze snapping to the door. His eyes were wide open as he discovered the man in front of him that he had been searching for all night long. Sakusa Kiyumi. Atsumu's heart stopped. So he wasn't wrong after all. Sakusa pulled the hood off his head. He was dressed casually, had obviously tried to make himself unrecognizable and he was successful. His hair was slightly longer, the curls now pulled out a bit, messier. Definitely hotter. Atsumu frowned, closing his mouth, which had fallen open in astonishment, and fixed his position so he could get a better look over the back of the couch. Sakusa entered the room and closed the door behind him. He rested his back against it leisurely and looked down at the blonde from above. Hey. Atsumu swallowed. Hey. Sakusa looked down at the ground for a second before looking Atsumu in the eyes again. I was listening to your concert. Aha. Atsumu's feelings were mixed. On the one hand, his heart jumped. Sakusa had really come to listen to him. Sakusa was there because of him. But on the other hand, he was still so disappointed and hurt. He was the one who had wronged Atsumu, so he didn't need to pretend as if nothing had happened. Sakusa pushed himself off the door and walked over to the couch, to Atsumu. He leaned over the back next to the blonde, propped his forearms on it and clasped his hands together, now looking deep into the big honey-colored eyes. Atsumu had to tilt his head up a bit to lose himself in the dark eyes of the man he would grow weak for over and over again. No. Not this time. Explain it to me. Atsumu's eyes widened for a split second. When Kagami outed you as the lead singer of Gemini, you could have used that as a stepping stone to a great career. But I didn't want to do that. Sakusa leaned down a little closer to Atsumu, while Atsumu straightened up slightly, leaning in Kiyumi's direction. Even when she didn't want to sign you, you could have had any other record label. I didn't care about that. And again, they got just a bit closer. And yet you decide to play here today. In this small bar? You didn't even think it was necessary to announce that you and your brother would play today on every of your social media platforms. Because we didn't want so many people to come. Sakusa's lips were hovering over Atsumu's now, their gazes fixed on each other's mouths. Atsumu's lips were slightly parted, breathing deeply against Sakusa's, ready to be drawn into his spell at any moment. You're driving me crazy, you know that? Atsumu closed his eyes, feeling SakuAtsu press his forehead against his own, letting his lips brush gently against the beautiful curly-haired man's, but they didn't kiss. SakuAtsu had his eyes closed as well, frowning and cupping Atsumu's jaw. Why did you let her kiss you? Atsumu frowned, opened his eyes slowly, and looked somewhat perplexed, almost sulkily, into Kayumi's eyes, which were staring deeply at him again. It's not like I had a choice. You always have a choice. Atsumu scoffed, releasing a sharp breath. He broke away from SakuAtsu and stood up, crossing his arms in front of his chest and turning to the singer by now, scowling at him. Why are you still blaming me? SakuAtsu swallowed, frowned, and looked at Atsumu perplexed as he raised his voice at him. I'm not blaming you, I'm just trying to understand all of this. You are. You come here and blame me for something I couldn't even do anything about. That's not true. It isn't, you know it, Omi. Why are you even here, huh? Because Samu and I started making music again? Because you want to use our talent for your own purposes? Because we as Gemini are just good enough for you? SakuAtsu's eyes widened. No, Achu, that's not how it is. That's not how it is. It's exactly like that. I can't remember a moment when I, Atsumu, have been enough for you. I can't remember a moment when you were truly interested in me for the person I am. Then let me show you that's not true. Let me show you that you are the one I want. Achu, please. Atsumu scoffed again, shaking his head. His gaze traveled to the floor for a few seconds before he was able to look Kayumi in the face again. Atsumu's eyes filled with tears, which he tried to keep in. They were slightly red, his jaw was clenched. You had your chance. You had 9 fucking weeks to make it up to me. You had the chance to let me explain it to you, but you chose not to even hear me out, instead immediately believing Kagami. A tear crept down Atsumu's cheek. It still hurt. Losing Kayumi hurt. And you're doing it again. SakuAtsu looked at Atsumu even more guiltily. Atsumu choked down the rising lump in his throat and gulped, scowling at SakuAtsu, not knowing how much longer his body would take this. He couldn't even act strong in front of SakuAtsu anymore. His mind was completely playing against him. Get out of here. SakuAtsu frowned and looked at the blonde in confusion. He saw how hard Atsumu was pulling himself together, how much he had to fight not to break down right here. This between them was something special. Always had been, and SakuAtsu had realized it all just way too late. Achu. Please. Oh, how much SakuAtsu wanted to hold him. It was a plea that revealed that Atsumu couldn't take it any longer. He didn't even look at Kayumi anymore, but stared at the couch in front of him, trying to distract his gaze, his mind with anything to keep from falling apart right here. SakuAtsu saw how his lips quivered, how much his whole body trembled. He eyed him for a moment longer before deciding to give in to the blonde. He turned wordlessly and grasped the door handle as he stopped for a second, taking a deep breath. Rin and I have been working on a song for the past few weeks that we plan to perform for the first time at our concert next week. SakuAtsu pulled out an envelope from his jacket and placed it on the side table next to the door, turned his head to the side so he would be able to look at Atsumu over his shoulder out of the corner of his eye, and continued speaking. These are front row tickets. Atsumu. SakuAtsu stilled for a moment, not knowing if what he was doing was okay with Atsumu. He didn't want to put him under any kind of pressure. Please come, you and your brother. Please just come and listen. Another tear rolled down his cheek as he watched SakuAtsu leave the room. He sniffled, unable to suppress a sob, and wiped the tears from his face. Atsumu was upset with how SakuAtsu was affecting him. How SakuAtsu could mess up his whole world. How he couldn't stop crying because of him. How his heart ached just because he couldn't break away from him. Even after all this time. He walked over to the table and picked up the envelope. He tried to wipe the recurring tears from his face and now examined the 2 tickets. One was dedicated to him, while the other was for Osamu. Atsumu held the concert ticket shakily in his hands and ran his fingertips over the golden letters that graced the ticket, spelling his name. A bit below, in smaller letters, there was a note telling him to turn it over. Atsumu frowned and watched the back, where another short message was left for him. I suck at expressing my feelings, but music has always helped me do that. Let me show you how I feel, Atsu. Was this really such a good idea? Stop looking like that. 𝒖�𝒄 slapped both twins on the back and pulled them out of their thoughts. They widened their eyes and looked at the model, perplexed. 𝒖�𝒄 chuckled. You'll like this song, trust me. Oh, you know it? Osamu raised an eyebrow and looked at him questioningly. 𝒖�𝒄 blushed and widened his eyes for a split second. He was obviously caught. Oh. Iwa-chan told me about it. Atsumu snorted, looking at 𝒖�𝒄 with a mischievous grin. Iwaizumi told you about it, or you put Iwaizumi up to something? What? 𝒖�𝒄 chuckled nervously. Carver, were you involved in this again? No. What do you want from me anyways? Carver, I swear. Atsumu was interrupted when Bakuto entered the stage and everyone around them squealed. Bakuto flashed them a big grin and welcomed the crowd, happy that the concert hall lethargy was playing in today was full. You guys are awesome. Please give your dearest boys more cheers and applause, they are especially nervous today. Bakuto grinned in Atsumu and Osamu's direction and the twins winced, blushing. Say hello to her. Lethargy. The crowd went wild and cheered, everyone was completely beside themselves. It was loud as the boys took the stage and they all went to their spots. Suna and Sakusa's eyes immediately moved to Osamu and Atsumu. Sakusa smiled. He smiled so warmly, so relieved, so happy that Atsumu was here, but Atsumu was still looking at him skeptically. Sakusa fixed his guitar and let his hands wander to the microphone. Before they started playing, he uttered a few words to his fans. The last few weeks have been turbulent and to be honest I almost lost sight of something that was so important to me. Sakusa's gaze wandered to Atsumu, looking at him in love. Or rather someone. Atsumu swallowed, his face flushed, he felt the heat creep into his face, how he was captured by Sakusa's dark eyes and how his heart beat faster and faster. Sakusa still managed to cast a spell over him. He probably always would. But fortunately Sakusa looked to Suna, the two smiling at each other. Fortunately, we have such good friends who will always guide us back to the right path. Sakusa now looked down at 𝒖�𝒄. You better listen to me now 𝒖�𝒄 Toru, because I'm only going to say this once, otherwise your loving Iwa-chan will break my neck. 𝒖�𝒄 blushed. You may be one of the most annoying people I've ever met. 𝒖�𝒄 pouted, crossed his arms in front of his chest, dumbfounded at what Sakusa was saying about him. Atsumu couldn't help but laugh. Seeing 𝒖�𝒄 like this was incredibly amusing. But thanks to you, we know, that we can't let our true love just drift away. Suna's gaze moved to Osamu, while Sakusa kept eye contact with Atsumu. That we must listen to our hearts. Atsumu swallowed, Sakusa stirred up all his emotions. This is for you guys. Osamu, Atsumu.
To the heart, I never kissed a mouth that tastes like yours. Strawberries and something more. Ooh yeah, I want it all. Lipstick on my guitar. Fill up the engine, we can drive real far. Go dancing underneath the stars. Ooh yeah, I want it all. Got me feeling like I wanna be that guy. I wanna kiss your eyes, I wanna drink that smile, I wanna feel like my soul's on fire, I wanna stay up all day and all
The boy smiled at the twins, making them blush hard.
Baby, you burn so hot, you make me shiver with the fire. You got this thing you started, I don't want it to stop. You know you make me shiver. Yeah, you got me singing like, ooh, I love it when you do it like that. And when you're closer, give me the shivers. Oh baby, you wanna dance till the sunlight cracks. And when they say the party's over, then we'll bring it right back. Oh no, say, ooh, I love it when you do it like that. And when you're closer, give me the shivers. Oh baby, you wanna dance till the sunlight cracks. And when they say the party's over, then we'll bring it right back. Yeah.
SakuAtsu and Atsumu maintained eye contact. SakuAtsu was out of breath, giving everything, giving himself completely to the song, putting all his feelings and emotions into it, and he couldn't help it. He couldn't help but let that damn mischievous grin slide across his lips when he saw how flushed Atsumu was. How beautiful he was. And Atsumu scoffed, shaking his head and looking down at the ground for a second before looking back up into the lead singer's dark eyes and giving him an even wider grin as well. He understood that SakuAtsu believed him, and he also understood that he was sorry. And maybe he didn't deserve to be forgiven so easily, but Atsumu couldn't help it. He couldn't help but fall in love over and over again with that smile, with that face, with that warm voice. He couldn't help but fall in love with that curly man in front of him. He would probably never stop loving him. I know I've been an idiot, but do you think you can give me a second chance? Or a 10th? Atsumu chuckled, small tears now filling the corners of his eyes. Not tears of sorrow, no, tears of joy. Atsumu nodded, giving SakuAtsu a big grin, and the curly-haired singer exhaled deeply in relief, nodding as well. Good, oh thank God, good. SakuAtsu was chuckling now. Wait for me, okay? He said in an almost hushed tone, and Atsumu nodded happily, mouthing a soundless I will in Kayumi's direction, making him beam even more. Atsumu knew everything was different this time. This time, Kayumi meant it.